And now it's with great pleasure that I present our first discussant, Fellegi. Dr. Fellegi was the Chief Statistician of Canada for almost 23 years, during which time Canada conducted 5 censuses. His career as Statistics Canada spanned over 50 years. He's an officer of the Order of Canada, a recipient of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Hungary, and a former president of the International Statistical Institute. Dr. Fellegi.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. How do I move this forward?
Arrows on the keyboard.
Oh, I was trying to use the mouse. Okay. Well, I'm trying to move the arrows, but
now it'll work.
There are at least 3 good reasons why it's a great pleasure to be here. First of all, it's always an honor to be associated in however remote a way with Morris Hansen. I consider him one of my great mentors. Although I'm older than Steve, but I'm still of a different generation from Morris. But I've known him when he did me the incredible good deed of appointing me to the Census Bureau's fabulous Census Methodology Advisory Committee back in the 60s when I wasn't yet 30, to serve with such eminent people as Bill Cochran, who was chairing the committee, and Paul Hartley, who was a member, and Fred Stefan, and Nathan Kiefitz, and Bill Meadow. I mean, names that are legends. Needless to say, I learned a heck of a lot more from them than I contributed, but it was one of the best mentorship I can imagine. And then I had the great honor to have him as the Methodology Advisory Committee of Statistics Canada when we established one. And he was serving as the chair until he died, literally until he died. So I consider Morris a friend, a mentor, and a great role model to think about. Secondly, I think back with great pleasure to my 1995 Morris Hansen lecture here when I was given the honor of talking in his name. And last but not least, it's always challenging and a pleasure to be associated with Steve, and this was no exception. He provided an insightful and provocative paper, and let me qualify the next bullet there. There is little that I disagree with, in the sense that those ideas are all worth exploring and researching and seeing how they can be put together. I could spend almost the same amount of time as he spent on this podium to disagree with specific details or to raise questions about some of them. But I think it's not worth the time, because I agree that those are all ideas that should be looked at. And in fact, the kind of fundamental rethinking that he's proposing is certainly a worthwhile exercise to embark upon and see how far it gets us. But I certainly agree that 2010 was broadly similar as to 1970, with this exception that in between there was this quixotic striving to count every single last person, which led to steep cost increases and layers of complication that accreted over the decades, always adding procedures to find a few more additional people and never taking or very seldom taking off any procedures. Until the 2010 census, I kept saying repeatedly, looked like a Rube Goldberg machine, and Rube Goldberg machines aren't cheap. So the goal that Steve proposes for 2030 is cheaper and better. The Bureau had a stated goal which is not that dissimilar from that for 2020, which is cheaper and as good as. Whereas an intermediate step is not really in conflict with cheaper and better for 2030. So again, there is not much to disagree with. And Steve proposes several directions for improvement. I put them in the three broad categories of using administrative records, perhaps even as full replacements of the census, basic improvements to the master address file and associated geographic systems, and pushing online completions. There were a lot more, but with poetic license or statistical license, I put them under these three headings. And the Bureau has major efforts underway in all these directions, plus one that I would add to those three, which is the thorough re-engineering of field systems and logistics, with a near real-time management system for field staff being envisaged for 2020, which could provide substantial cost savings and efficiencies. Now, the reason I'm so familiar with all these efforts is that I'm a member of the National Academy of Sciences panel that was put together really to comment about the 2010 census, but as things evolved, it was a lot more active in being advisory about the 2020 census. And in fact, it had a major innovation in my mind, at least, and that was that instead of sitting in its ivory tower and passing learned judgment at the end of the process, which is very often how the Academy issues its reports, it decided to break into informal working groups and actually work with the Census Bureau along the way and stimulate them, help them, comment, criticize along the way. And it did, in fact, break into these four areas that I put on the previous slide. So, looking to 2020, with cheaper and as good as, not 2030, cheaper and better, I should confidently look forward. As I say, there is a great deal of effort, all very positive, and very stimulating and enthusiastic, and management support. All the ingredients are there. Yet I'm amazed. Wow. Well, there are three sources of uneasiness, and they all have to do really with the interpretation of as good as. As good as what? As a profession, we did a lousy job going way back in coming up with a workable and reasonably easy to communicate definition of census quality. And Steve talked about that quite a bit, and I certainly totally agree with it. There are literally tens of thousands of quality measures, gross versus net, undercount, at what level of geography, by age, sex, ethnic origin, most of them politically sensitive. All these breakdowns have different levels of sensitivity, but a lot of them are very high levels of sensitivity. In the absence of a reasonably simple measure of quality, we are therefore handicapped in either maximizing the accuracy for given cost or minimizing cost for given quality. Yet, the latter is almost what the Census Bureau has promised in as good as, but cheaper. We were lucky in Statistics Canada. Again, implicitly, we were given the other optimization task. As good as you can make it for a given cost. For the last 5 or 6 censuses, basically, Parliament told Statistics Canada, you have the same budget as you had last time, adjusted for inflation and household numbers. And that's all you have. And now you do the best you can do with that amount of money. Given cost is a fixed thing. You can hit the target or not hit the target and know when you have done so. Given quality is a lot more vague. You don't really know whether you hit it or under what conditions you hit it. You start speculating perhaps, what do I need to do to all the thousands of quality measures to achieve as good as in the next census. And this can be potentially paralyzing. Particularly if you interpret as good as being the same as 2010. Because the same as can only be reproduced by the same as procedure. Any change in procedure will result in change, some of it for the better, some of it for the worse. And is that consistent with as good as, and how do we communicate that concept? Second source of unease is funding. The concept of cheaper and as good as is like comfort food. Makes you feel good but unexcited, may even be soporific. And I think a significant amount of funding for testing has to take place, and that has to be motivated. I don't think it can be motivated by the as good as and cheaper goal, unless it becomes as good as and with a specified substantial cost reduction that now wakes up those that are tending to be soporific. Third is what I call the proxy measure of quality. Again, it has to do with the interpretation of as good as or quality in general. Lack of deep understanding of as good as can result in trying to reproduce what 2010 methodology would have produced. And there's only one way of reproducing that. In fact, there isn't even one way of reproducing that. But the only possible way of reproducing that would be to repeat 2010. And that isn't going to be necessarily cheaper. An example is administrative record research, to simulate what would have happened if administrative records were used in lieu of non-response follow-up, which is the most expensive part of the census process. But interpreting any difference as quality deterioration. In fact, when you do this kind of administrative record research, you can only do simulation. You can simulate what would have happened had we used administrative records in 2010, and how would the results compare. And surprise, surprise, the results aren't the same. But are they better? Are they worse? They are different. All we know is they are different. Trying to reproduce as close as possible 2010 is an acceptable working hypothesis in early explorations. But we must not forget that census may not always be right. When there are differences, it's quite possible that the alternative is closer to the truth than the census is not. We don't know. Now some suggestions. Well, the most obvious suggestion is inject some excitement in Congress by announcing an ambitious cost reduction goal. God only knows there is scope for it. Second, a little more difficult, but actually perhaps even more critical, would be a major education campaign aimed at key decision makers and users about census quality, emphasizing that any change in methodology will inevitably result in some measures getting better and others worse, though all changes are likely to be moderately small. Is that consistent with the public's interpretation of as good as? It should be, or it could be, but there is a lot of work before that happens. Last suggestion, the research and testing program should place emphasis on understanding the error structure of administrative records and the census. Where they differ from one another, under what circumstances is one or the other likely to be correct. Certainly avoid the trap of assuming that any difference means that the census is right and the administrative sources are wrong. But that can only happen if this is incorporated into the testing program, of which I haven't seen any sign yet. I mean, not of the testing program, I've seen signs of it, but not of this kind of probing research, which would result in a requirement to do some in-depth follow-up of discrepancies between administrative records and the census as part of the testing program. And I think that's a very important suggestion. Finally, I apologize for having gone beyond my remit to discuss Pete's excellent paper, but running censuses is habit forming. God only knows I've done it long enough. So I couldn't restrict myself from commenting on what's happening, but I want to